And joining us now in studio is Edward Greenspon, chair of the Global Positioning Strategy Project. And Eddie, we welcome you back to TVO.
Great to be here, Steve.
To be a regular in these parts, it's good to have you back. I want to start by reading a quote from your document. The report sets out a global positioning strategy for a Canada highly engaged by necessity and inclination with the world around us. The Canadian International Council convened a panel to travel the country, meeting with experts and tapping into existing research. The CIC demanded just one thing, that we settle for no tepid Canadian compromises. Our aim has to be to produce a bold and original document, but a realistic and actionable one as well. Okay, first question. Why does Canada need a so-called global positioning strategy right now?
Because the globe is moving all around. Everything's changing around us. The United States is in relative decline, as we know. It's harder to get our exports into the United States. Asia is rising. Global warming is melting our Arctic. There's a fierce competition in the world for resources. On and on these changes go, Steve. And you got to sort of say, how does Canada position itself for maximum advantage in a world that is changing almost in the way that the world hasn't changed since the rise of the United States in the late 1800s.
Another quote from your document. Canadians face serious issues related to global power shifts. The biggest is the extent to which we can continue to rely on the U.S. for economic growth, and given geography and history, the extent to which we can find alternatives. What did your report conclude on the very significant question, obviously, of how much relying on the U.S. we can do going forward?
Well, you know, the first thing we did was looked a little retrospectively, and it was a little bit shocking in a way, because when you backed out energy exports and you looked at Canadian exports to the United States, 2000 and 2008, we didn't want to have a recession effect. Right. They were down 20%. Most of that's felt in Ontario, and I guess Ontarians feel that in the sense of manufactured goods, some of it from the dollar, some of it from the border, and other effects too. But that's a big, sharp drop. So the free trade era, in a way, the gains of the free trade were wrung out in the first dozen years of that era. In the last 8 years, it's been in decline. So, you know, that's number one. Two, a lot of people say, and most reports say, let's have a grand bargain. Let's go to a customs union. Let's go to security perimeter.
All of which mean?
All of which means that we'll have access to the United States because they'll open their arms and we'll have a greater integration with the United States. We looked at that and we thought, you know, not a bad idea, but it's just not on. It's not on politically in Canada, and it's certainly not on politically in the United States right now. The United States is worried about security, that is suspicious of foreigners and even Canadians and the trade and the economic gains that they might extract out of the United States. So that's not on. So we had to look for a different kind of solution to do two things simultaneously. And we can walk and chew gum. Canadians don't really believe that, but we can walk and chew gum. We've got a deep...
At the same time?
At the exact same time, and without falling over. Even, I think it was Lyndon Johnson who posed that challenge. We can deepen relations with the United States, although not through a grand bargain, and we talk about other ways, and we've got to broaden and diversify with the world, because we can't count on the United States as we have before to automatically provide our prosperity.
Okay, a couple things to follow up on there. The grand bargain, I'm wondering why you kind of, or your group I should say, not just you, say it's just not on politically. We have a prime minister who thinks, you know, reasonably well about the United States. We have a leader of the opposition who worked in the United States, for goodness sakes, for many, many years before coming here. They both don't have a kind of default knee-jerk hate on for the U.S. So why do you think that why do you think they wouldn't expend any of their currency to create a grand bargain, which has some benefits to Canada, as you point out?
I think first off, we have a prime minister who's frustrated in his dealings with the United States, and particularly around the border. And you know, he extracted an agreement around Buy America, but you know, it's been very hard for him to deal with the homeland security mentality of the United States. And we have an opposition leader who has a party that isn't really liking that a lot. But the big issue here is the United States. You have to have a partner to dance with, Steve, and I don't think there's a partner there in that way in the United States. They have their own economic problems. They have their own political problems. I don't think Barack Obama is going to want to sell this one and expend his political capital there. And even, you know, Alan Gottlieb, who, you know, the former Canadian ambassador to Washington, former Undersecretary of State of External Affairs in Canada, he's kind of said, you know, the conditions just aren't there now.
So we got to find friends elsewhere.
We have to find friends elsewhere, but we also have to find ways in which we can deepen the relationship with the United States, because, you know, 25% of our GDP still derives from trade with the United States. 1/4 of our well-being depends on our merchandise getting over that border and our people getting over that border. So we also have to deepen and broaden simultaneously. So, you know, what is deepening if it's not a grand bargain? It's kind of I think it's being more globally engaged. I think this is very reinforcing in that, and pooling our resources and causes with the United States, finding things that we can do together to common purpose in the world.
But I know that one of the things that Canadians in the past have often felt skittish about is, for example, harmonizing, you know, a variety of different things with the United States. Let's say environmental standards or labor standards or whatever. And our traditional position has always been, no, we don't want to do that because we're better than them. But the fact is we're not, right? Your report points out environmentally we're terrible. We're way behind them.
Yeah,
so would we want to do it from that standpoint? Maybe we can't catch up to them.
You know, we did much worse on our Kyoto commitments than even they did, if you will. But, you know, we've harmonized recently vehicle emission standards with American vehicle emission standards and with standards that began in California and have rippled out of there. So having some standards with the United States is a good thing. But, you know, we said we want to be bold and we said we want to be original. So we say, look, let's take NORAD, which is a great binational institution, and let's expand it into the maritime realm. It's done a wonderful job in air. It's given Canada and the United States a joint cause over many years. There's no system in the world in which Canadians, the Americans, allow a foreign country to have as much control as they do in NORAD, which even on 9/11, you know, a Canadian was in command of the skies above the United States. So we're saying we have more coastline than any country in the world, and not a lot of capacity really to patrol it properly, particularly as the Arctic melts. So let's do that jointly. Let's have common cause there. As one example. Haiti, which we're working together, Afghanistan, and we feel Mexico, Canada has an interest in Mexico. Let's work together with the Mexicans and the Americans because we all share this interest in a stable North America.
Fair enough, I completely understand that. Having said that, this thickening border is one terrorist attack away from being impenetrable altogether. And as you point out, so much of our economy depends on that border not being so thick. That's a terribly precarious position for this country to be in, and we're always going to be in that position. What do we do about that?
We're going to be in that position. I mean, you're right.
That's just it.
That's what you're dealing with, and you have to try to build up goodwill so that, you know, when the door slams, which it will if there's a terrorist attack that emanates from Canada, that's the nightmare scenario. Then, or that, you know, perhaps propaganda in the United States says emanated from Canada, as we had occur after 9/11. Then we're going to have to deal with it and try to get it raised up. So you got to build friendships. You got to build relationships. You have to build connections at all levels, and hopefully then you can call on a president, you can call on serious Congress people and Homeland Security because you've built trust and confidence. So we say let's have joint border posts. There was a discussion around this several years ago. If our border people and their border people are kind of working together, over time they will build up a trust level, and they'll say, well, those Canadians actually know what they're doing. And nothing will insulate us. All you can do is improve the conditions.
Gotcha. Okay, let's move further afield from the U.S. and look at the three countries that I think are mentioned most often in your report, other than the United States: China, India, Mexico. I think the most fascinating thing I read about Mexico in there is their economy is going to be bigger than ours in 20 years if things keep going the way they are.
Yeah.
So this is, we got to know more about these folks. Our relationship with all three is described as underdeveloped. What does it say about us that we have underdeveloped relationships with three countries that you see as being absolutely essential to our future?
Well, it says a couple things. One, we're not as global as we think we are. Two, we're not the trading nation we think we are. You take away the United States and we've got a $50 billion annual trade deficit with the rest of the world. That's not very good. You know, China, we have, I think it's a $28 billion trade deficit with China alone. So we're not as global. And thirdly, we kind of bought in too much probably to the free trade agreement and the benefits. Now, the free trade agreement was a wonderful thing for Canada. You know,
you
fabulous.
About NAFTA or the original?
Well, the FTA and NAFTA both, I think, and you know, and trade with the United States and Mexico multiplied many times in the early years of it. But I think we stopped thinking. I think we thought we had an easy ride, and we stopped thinking about the rest of the world and stopped developing there.
So we got to start thinking about the rest of the world for a change.
Think about it more, and we have to be consistent about it. You know, you can't change policies every 2-3 years. The national interest does not change. Political parties might change, leaders might change, fashion might change, but the national interest is the national interest. We have an interest in trading with most of the world. We have an interest in having relations, particularly with the rising powers of China and India.
On the issue of change, and changing as if it were in fashion, Did I read in here that we seem to change our foreign ministers once every year and a half or so, or once every couple of years?
Well, yeah, we've had, you know, we sort of thought we'd do a little project, perhaps of interviewing some of the foreign ministers, and there's 16 in the last, I think, 28 years or 30 years. So yeah, an average tenure of about a year and a half. That's not serious. You know, CETA ministers as well. You know, you do development out in the world, and CETA is a very slow-moving organization for a bunch of reasons. It takes, on average, almost 4 years to get an approval to a proposal that's put through CETA, which is twice the tenure, at least, of the average minister. You're on your third minister by the time you got your proposal through.
Right. Let's talk about citizenship. You would like to see Canada aim to be the first country in the world with a dual citizenship agreement with China. What would that mean?
Well, you know, let's talk about notions of citizenship and sovereignty for a second. The panel that I traveled with was a younger panel, not a kid panel. It wasn't a child's crusade, but they were mid-career people in the ascendancy of their career between 28 and 50, the group. And they have a kind of different notion in some ways of citizenship and sovereignty. It's a relative notion. They're very proud Canadians, but you know, their horizon is much further afield. So, you know, the people might go outside the country, they might come back in the country, they might go out again, they might come back. It's not about a brain gain, it's not about a brain drain, it's about this brain chain of people moving in and out. And we think that's a good thing for Canada. There's like 2.7 million Canadians living abroad at any given time. That's about 8% of the population of the country. And within the country, there's, you know, people, as we know, from all over the world. It's a fabulously, spectacularly diverse country. So we say, let's facilitate that movement, and let's facilitate it also with China, where most of our immigration, or the largest immigration comes from. China, number one, India, number two. 2.3 million Canadians of Chinese and Indian origin. That's the size of Saskatchewan and Manitoba combined.
Okay, but you want to talk...
huge. So we want to move towards an understanding with the stretch goal of dual citizenship. That's not something that's going to happen in the next 2 years, the next 5 years. First, we want to have labor mobility agreements. We want to have pensions so that you can make it easier for people to leave the country, come back, and spread Canada.
Well, you want to talk about a tough political sell. You can imagine there will be people who will say, wait a sec, dual citizenship between China and Canada, there's 1 billion plus of them, there's 33 million of us. What if they all decide they want to move to Canada because they're joint citizens? I mean, this is obviously...
Well, I don't think they're all coming to Canada. I think the bigger threat is the Canadians are going to China, the way the economic growth has gone recently.
Well, I read a little
chauvinistic.
I read those polls the other day. The Chinese love us. They want to come here.
Okay, they're coming here. I can think of worse things that we could populate the country a little bit more, certainly. Look, we have dual citizenship agreements with most countries in the world. I believe in 5 to 10 years from now, this will be a fairly conventional wisdom. But today, I'm happy that it's a provocative thought. Okay.
You are also championing something you call a new multilateralism. What does that look like to you?
Well, we're kind of describing it in some ways. You know, the G20 is and the G8 are, you know, both here this week, and the G20 is part of the new multilateralism. It's a multilateralism that's sort of seeking to find some kind of balance between being representative and being effective. And the multilateralism that existed at the Copenhagen conference, for instance, on climate change, was not very effective. 192 countries plus the European Union running around and not really getting anywhere. So the new multilateralism is going to be more fluid, more ad hoc, groups of countries coming together on issues. We see Brazil, South Africa, India, China, you know, several groups of countries coming together on issues there. And we'll see much more fluidity in this and people trying to find new architectures as there in the G20. The question about the G20 is it more effective and is it more representative, or is it, you know, is it going to be the best of effectiveness and representative, or is it going to be the worst of it? And I think we don't know the answer to that yet.
Well, it's more representative than the G8, but whether it's more effective remains to be seen. We'll see what comes out of this weekend, right?
Well, yeah, it might be, and beyond. You know, I think the architecture is in motion, and that's the important thing here. And Canada has to learn how to play in a different world and not just adhere to the things that we're comfortable with.
I think we know the basic multilateral institutions that we certainly care a lot about, the United Nations, NORAD, NATO. you know, there's one up in the Arctic whose acronym I forget right now, but we're in there with Russia and Sweden and Norway and
very important organization for Canada, the Arctic Council. And the Arctic Council, you know, we feel is actually very reflective of the new multilateralism, and that it's a group of states in which Canada can play a leadership role, who have some issues that they really need to deal with in common: shipping standards, environmental standards, you know, various safety issues through the Arctic region. And it has Indigenous group representation built into it, because non-state actors play on the international scene. I mean, you can't imagine an environmental agreement or discussion that's not going to include business groups and environmental groups also. And in the Arctic, I think the Indigenous people have a large stake in how that works out.
Sure. Ed, let's, just before we go over and join the others on the other side of the studio, do one more thing, and that is you start your report with the quote that I would actually like to end this conversation with, and it's from Prime Minister Harper, in which he said, "Canadians want a significant role, a clear, confident, and influential role. As proud citizens, they don't want a Canada that just goes along. They want a Canada that leads. They want a Canada that reflects their values and interests and that punches above its weight. Do we as Canadians have the desire and the ability to achieve all this?" What do you think the answer to that is?
I think Canadians have the desire, for certain. I think Canadians are always proud and feel fulfilled when they do good things out in the world. And I think, quite frankly, that even includes Afghanistan, until it became a little bit more muddled in terms of what our strategies and values were more recently. I think Canadians like to play. I think we have got great assets out in the world, and a spirit of goodwill. And Canada has to be a globally engaged nation. So it's there. The question is, our government's going to have the policies and strategies that allow us to maximize our advantage, to play, you know, up to our potential in the kind of world as it changes. And that's what we have to see.
Okay. Let's set our GPS for right over there, and we're going to go continue the discussion right now.